The next game we want to cover here is Georgia versus Kentucky. This was one of the main 7 p.m., 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern nightcaps. And I thought this was going to be a phone game. If I'm not lying to you, I had it on, but I was like, oh, I'm going to flip between this and Colorado, and maybe give some of the other conferences some love. This was probably the scariest night at Kroger Field that Georgia's had in a long time.
Yeah, it was a tough one, and for Georgia to get anything going offensively against this stout Kentucky defense. We knew that going into the season that Kentucky had the defense to do something like this, but we saw South Carolina run it up on them last week. So not really sure what happened with Georgia early, but they just couldn't get it going on the ground, in the air. Nothing was working. They're just lucky, in Athens that Kentucky also had nothing going offensively. I mean, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Like, I can't throw out accusations, but I'm like, did Brock Vandagriff know the playbook? Like, as we know, he was the backup quarterback for Georgia last year. If he knew the playbook for the defensive side, he didn't really take advantage of it. But with Kentucky's strong defense, I mean, you saw Deion Walker do what he does, 4 touchdowns in the game. And where Kentucky was able to shine was they were 9 from 16 from third downs. And I keep talking about this because that's where if you're down on the road, you have all this pressure. All the pressure's on Georgia. There's really no pressure on Kentucky. Like, you're the underdog. You're coming off of an absolute beatdown from South Carolina. Yeah. And if you lose this game, it's okay. It's Georgia, right? But you're going into the fourth quarter, you're leading, and you're 9 from 16 on third down. You're converting 58% of your third downs. You're keeping drives going. Obviously, you want to see more on the scoring side, but Dime Sumo Karangbaye, and God bless me for his name, he has the juice. 98 yards on the ground, absolute workhorse, 22 carries, and he was the main piece for this rushing defense that we have seen challenges with. You can comment all you want on the post, but the proof is in the pudding. And so that was where Georgia struggled on the rushing defense side. There was not any struggles on the passing defense side, and we know where Brock Vandagriff ranks. He's 17th in the conference when it comes to passing yards. And Hunter, you could tell me who's ahead of him.
I mean, there's only 16 teams in the SEC, so how you got your starting quarterback outside, but you got 2 Auburn quarterbacks ahead of him, and who else is ahead of him?
You got Arch Manning ahead of him.
Arch Manning
has played in Colorado State, and I think obviously he came in for a couple quarters in UTSA in relief for Quinn early in the game. But we got to see more on the offensive side for Kentucky. Props to Georgia for making a stop with 3 minutes left. Two big defensive stops. Batting the pass down by Jalen Walker and team. And so the question for me was, does Georgia deserve to be number one? We all kind of came in here consensus like Texas should be number one. They beat Michigan and Big Noon, and they absolutely destroyed Colorado State, and they destroyed UTSA. But I think there's a case to be made for Georgia.
Are they the number one team in the country? If you're only looking at this year and you're not looking at years past where they came into this year as the number one seed, I don't think that they are looking stronger than Texas. We've seen now 2 out of 3 weeks where the offense has struggled to start early. And that's not something that you have the luxury of doing with every team that you play. They're lucky that Clemson also couldn't get anything going. Kentucky also couldn't get anything going. Now, Georgia's defense is great, but we know Kentucky doesn't have great offense. 8 quarters straight, no touchdown. So, they can run, and they ran all over Georgia. Georgia's now in the bottom half of the SEC in rushing yards allowed per game. They're over 100 rush yards per game. That's not going to be good against Alabama, but we're not talking about Alabama right now. But, from Georgia, you hate to see Tate Ratledge go down as early as he did. And you don't want to see that because of, how he is as a prospect and what he has going for him. It's a huge hit, and Kentucky kind of got in that backfield a lot. No sacks there, but they did have multiple tackles for loss. So from Georgia going forward, building that protection again, getting Carson Beck comfortable. Usually he has passes at every different layer. This one, he was opting for things a little bit closer in. He couldn't get the run game going. Nothing was really developing. No game plan was developing. So going forward, you can't blame the road game because you have your hardest 3 games this year are played on the road for Georgia with Alabama, Texas, and Ole Miss. So Going forward, you just hope to see a little bit more comfortability on the offense from Carson Beck.
Definitely. And you hope that like people are allowed to have stinkers, and that's why I said, does Georgia deserve to be number one? I get it. Texas has the game control. If we're just going to go off of this season, like I said, I'm still in the camp that Clemson's better than Michigan. There's nothing. Michigan has a quarterback controversy, but for Georgia, offensively, Carson Beck had his worst performance, 160 passing yards. Second worst was against Georgia Tech last year. He had to think about 170 passing yards. So when he's not playing well, it is clearly a problem, and when it comes to games being close, but they're still good enough to win. Defensively, we talked about the run defense. We understand where the pass defense stands. I mean, Malachi Starks is still doing his thing, and you're grinning over there because you know. And then on the rushing side, we have to be impressed with what we saw from Trevor Etienne. I think he had over 70 yards. The run game got to about 102 yards, but I need to see more. And I might have mentioned it earlier from Colby Young and the rest of the receiving cast, right? Colby Young had 5 touchdowns last year for Miami. They brought him in here to kind of be the second or third wide receiver. We understand what happened with Ra Thomas, and Dominic Lovett's been leading the team in terms of receiving, him and Oscar Delp, but there's not this big play guy. And that's where if the run game's not hitting where it needs to be hitting, you had those explosive plays in the past. And so I think a case can be made. I think it could be 1A, 1B, but I do have Texas as 1, but I also think that teams are able to have a pass when they win 28 straight conference games, and they've probably lost, less than 5 games over the last couple of years.
They tend to lose to Alabama, but no, I mean, they had the boys in stripes out there playing for them too. I don't like to blame refs for anything, but Georgia ripped off Jamarian Wilcox's helmet, and then Kentucky got the face mask call for it. So there's a couple things in there that were questionable for the game. Can't play the shoulda, coulda, woulda, but they'll bounce back. I don't think this game is indicative of what Georgia is or will be this year. But like I said, they do have Alabama, they do have Ole Miss, they do have Texas. If they want to be number 1 again, they'll have plenty of opportunities to prove it. Their next game with a win in Tuscaloosa on the road would give them that number 1 back, in my opinion. On the other side of the ball, like Kentucky, they did come to play defensively for sure. And then in the running game, they came to play as well, getting over 170 yards on the ground. So what they couldn't do is they couldn't get any offense going, and it's frustrating to see, and I don't want to keep harping on it, but they have weapons. There was on that last play before they had to punt, Barry Brown is running free for a play to put him in the end zone, and then the ball gets batted.
What do you think?
What's that?
Carson Beck would do anything for a Barry Brown on his team right now.
Right. Well, it's like the weapons are there. He's open. They're getting the separation, and then he's just not completing the passes. So, only 3 completions last week. This week, a little bit better, but there has to be some sort of game planning around the lack of protection. Butch Hadman there, the OC, needs to figure out how to get these guys involved early, quick slants, quick passes. It's not Brock Vandagriff's fault necessarily. I don't think you go with anyone else because he has that. Georgia lived in the backfield there. Kentucky only stayed in this game because of yards after contact and being able to break those tackles. We saw, Sumo Kongbaye break a ton of tackles and get those additional yards. Without that, Kentucky would have been down and out because they had multiple deep field goals that kept them in this game. If Kentucky doesn't change something offensively, they can't keep getting by with field goals in close games like this. Like, you didn't win. It's still a 0-1 for the week on the chart.
Yeah. When you hold the number 1 team to 13 points, you just want 2 touchdowns wins the game. A touchdown and all those field goals wins the game. And I know Kentucky fans can do math, but it's just there's a point where it's, I'm happy for this moral victory. I know there's some criticism for Stoops for punting with 3 minutes left. But when the defense is playing that well, like, I don't blame them to play the field position game in that situation. I think some more blame or opportunity, like you said, comes from the offensive side, and I don't think it, like you said, it's to take out Brock. It's just to kind of make sure we put him in better spots with the weapons around him, because we know what Dane Key and Jamori Macklin and Barry and Brown can do with the ball in their hand, and it's just bittersweet. I feel for Kentucky fans, it's a bittersweet win, and for Georgia fans and for Georgia, like, you did what you had to do. You got out of there. It's one of those games where you're just wanting the clock to hit 0 so fast. And they were able to escape there. So some things to build on both sides for sure.